The Zephyrian fleet commander Veltar watched helplessly as another allied cruiser exploded in brilliant orange fire against the star-speckled void. The Corvin Empire's massive dreadnoughts continued their relentless advance, their crimson hulls gleaming like fresh blood under the distant sun's light. Each pulse from their plasma cannons meant the death of hundreds of brave souls who had answered the call to defend the last free worlds. "Admiral, we've lost the Moonrise and the Dancing Star," reported his tactical officer, her normally steady voice cracking under the weight of defeat. "The Corvins are pushing through Sector 7. Our defensive line is collapsing." Veltar's four arms gripped the command rail as he surveyed the holographic battle display. Red enemy markers vastly outnumbered the dwindling blue dots representing the combined forces of 12 different species. They had all come together in this final stand: Zephyrians with their crystal-like exoskeletons, the plant-like Sylvani, the gas-breathing Nethek, and 9 other races. United in desperation, they fought against an empire that had already consumed half the galaxy. "Signal all ships," Veltar commanded, his translator converting his natural harmonic speech into the common military frequency. "Prepare for final charge. We die here, but maybe we can take enough of them with us to give the evacuation fleets more time." The massive Corvin flagship, a kilometer-long behemoth called the Extinction's Edge, began charging its primary weapon. Veltar had seen recordings of what that terrible cannon could do. It had cracked the moon of Altair Prime in half just 3 cycles ago. When it fired, the battle would be over. The last organized resistance in this sector would be nothing more than expanding gas and metal debris. "Fleet acknowledges, Admiral," came the reply. "All captains report ready for final charge." Veltar closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to the stellar winds that had guided his people across the void for millennia. When he opened them again, he was ready to lead his people into their last battle. The Corvin Empire would win here, as they had won everywhere else, but they would pay dearly for this victory. "All ships advance. For our worlds, for our children, for the memory of those who fell before us. Give them nothing easily." The Allied fleet surged forward, a desperate wave of defiance against overwhelming darkness. Energy weapons lit up space like a festival of death, and, for a moment, Veltar felt a fierce pride burn in his chest. They might die here, but they would die as free beings, not as slaves to the Corvin machine. The first wave of fighters from both sides clashed in a swirling melee of destruction. Veltar's own ship, the Harmony of Spheres, shuddered as enemy fire found its mark. Sparks flew from damaged consoles as his crew worked frantically to keep their weapons online. Through the chaos, he could see the Extinction's Edge growing larger on the main screen, its terrible cannon now glowing with barely contained energy. 60 seconds to weapons range, his navigator announced. Veltar nodded grimly. In 60 seconds, they would be close enough to do real damage to the Corvin flagship. In 65 seconds, they would all be dead. It was a trade he was willing to make if it meant delaying the inevitable conquest of the Outer Rim worlds by even a few days. Suddenly, space itself seemed to tear open behind the Allied fleet. A massive rupture in hyperspace appeared, crackling with energies that made Veltar's sensors scream in protest. He had seen ships exit hyperspace before, but never like this, never with such raw, violent force that reality itself seemed to buckle and protest. "What in the void is that?" his tactical officer gasped. Veltar could only stare as something enormous began to emerge from the hyperspace tear. It was a ship, but unlike anything in his extensive military database. Where Corvin vessels were built for intimidation with their blood-red armor and cruel angles, and where Allied ships favored smooth curves and elegant lines, this newcomer was purely functional. Its hull was a dark gray that seemed to absorb light, marked only by strange symbols and what appeared to be weapon ports, hundreds of them. The ship that emerged was massive, easily matching the Extinction's Edge in size, but its design spoke of a completely different philosophy. Where Corvin ships proclaimed their dominance through fear, this vessel simply stated its purpose: war. As it fully cleared the hyperspace rift and the tear sealed behind it, every sensor on the battlefield focused on the newcomer. A communication burst erupted across all frequencies, cutting through the jamming that had plagued both fleets throughout the battle. The voice that came through spoke in perfect galactic standard, though the accent was completely unfamiliar. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Terran Battleship Defiant Dawn. We received your distress call. Sorry we're late to the party." The silence that followed Captain Chin's transmission lasted exactly 3 seconds before chaos erupted across every communication channel. Veltar's communications officer was frantically trying to isolate the source while his tactical team analyzed the newcomer's energy signatures. "Admiral, I'm reading massive power outputs from that ship," the tactical officer reported, her voice filled with wonder. "Their reactor signature is off our scales. And those weapon ports. I count at least 400 separate targeting systems." Veltar stared at the gray behemoth that had positioned itself between his battered fleet and the Corvin Armada. The name echoed in his mind, Terran. He had heard whispers of a species by that name, rumors from deep space traders who claimed to have encountered them in the far rim territories. But those were just stories, tales told in cantinas about a violent, primitive species that had somehow stumbled into space travel. "Captain Chun," Veltar transmitted. "This is Admiral Veltar of the Free Worlds Alliance. We were not aware that your people possessed vessels of this class." The response came with what sounded almost like amusement. "Admiral, there's a lot about humans that might surprise you. We've been monitoring Corvin expansion for the past 6 months. Frankly, we're not impressed with their methods." On the main display, the Corvin fleet had stopped its advance. Veltar could imagine the confusion aboard their ships as they tried to categorize this new threat. The Extinction's Edge had halted its charging sequence, its massive cannon powering down as tactical officers scrambled to analyze the Terran vessel. "Unknown ship," came a transmission from the Corvin flagship, the words dripping with the characteristic arrogance of their species. "You are interfering in a lawful conquest operation of the Corvin Empire. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Captain Chin's laugh came through clearly over the comm channel, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and absolutely terrifying. "Lawful conquest? That's a new one. I suppose genocide is just another Tuesday for you people." The Defiant Dawn began to move, and Veltar watched in fascination as the massive ship maneuvered with surprising grace. Its engines left no visible trail, no plasma wake like conventional drives. Instead, space itself seemed to bend around the vessel as it accelerated toward the Corvin line. "All Allied ships, pull back to minimum safe distance," Captain Chin ordered. "We're about to demonstrate why you don't mess with human space." Veltar hesitated for only a moment before issuing the retreat order. His instincts told him that this human captain knew exactly what she was doing, and that being too close might be extremely unhealthy for his crews. The first Corvin attack came as a coordinated barrage from 12 heavy cruisers. Plasma bolts that could melt through 3 meters of standard armor plating struck the Defiant Dawn's hull and simply disappeared, absorbed by some kind of energy field that made the ship's outline shimmer like heat distortion. "Interesting." Chin's voice came over the comm, still carrying that note of casual amusement. "Is that supposed to hurt?" What happened next redefined Veltar's understanding of space combat. The Terran battleship opened fire with weapons that defied every tactical manual he had ever studied. Instead of the bright plasma bolts or coherent energy beams favored by most spacefaring species, the human ship launched what appeared to be simple projectiles, metallic slugs moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The first salvo struck 3 Corvin cruisers simultaneously. The kinetic energy release was beyond devastating. It was apocalyptic. The cruisers didn't just explode. They were simply erased from existence, converted to expanding clouds of superheated plasma in microseconds. "Railguns," Chen explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "accelerate a depleted uranium slug to 12% of light speed, and physics does the rest. We've found that most species get distracted by flashy energy weapons and forget that momentum is still a universal constant." The Corvin fleet, which had been advancing in perfect formation just moments before, suddenly found itself in complete disarray. Ships broke formation, some attempting to flee while others charged forward in desperate rage. The Extinction's Edge began powering its main cannon again, targeting the human ship with obvious intent to obliterate this upstart newcomer. Admiral Veltar, Chen said, her voice suddenly becoming serious. You might want to watch this next part. Consider it a demonstration of human diplomatic philosophy. The Defiant Dawn rotated to present its dorsal surface to the Corvin flagship. What Veltar had initially taken for armor plating opened up like flower petals, revealing the largest weapon he had ever seen. The energy buildup was immediate and terrifying, creating spatial distortions that made his sensors scream warnings about gravity well formation. What is that weapon? His tactical officer whispered. Before anyone could answer, the human ship fired. A beam of pure annihilation lanced out from the Defiant Dawn, not toward the extinction's edge, but past it. The beam struck a lifeless asteroid roughly the same size as the Corvin flagship, and for a moment, the asteroid simply ceased to exist. Veltar watched through his fingers as enough firepower to level a planet struck the Defiant Dawn. For a moment, the ship disappeared entirely within a miniature star of destructive energy. When the light faded, he expected to see nothing but debris and cooling plasma. Instead, the Terran Battleship hung in space completely undamaged, its hull not even scorched. The energy field surrounding it pulsed once, like a living thing shrugging off an annoying insect. Well, that was rude, Captain Chen observed. I was trying to have a civilized conversation. The Defiant Dawn began to accelerate toward the Corvin fleet, and, as it moved, it began to change. Sections of the hull reconfigured themselves, revealing weapons systems that had been completely hidden moments before. The ship seemed to grow larger, more menacing, as if it were transforming from a warship into something that belonged in the nightmares of lesser civilizations. All Corvin vessels, this is your final warning, Chen transmitted. You have 30 seconds to begin retreat procedures. After that, I stop being polite. The Corvin Admiral's response was predictably arrogant. Human scum. The Corvin Empire has conquered 1,000 worlds. We do not retreat from primitive vermin. 29. Chen counted down calmly. 28. 27. Several of the smaller Corvin ships began moving away from the formation, their captains apparently having more sense than their admiral. But the core fleet, including the massive dreadnoughts and the flagship itself, held position. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. What followed could only be described as systematic annihilation. The Defiant Dawn moved through the Corvin fleet like a predator among prey, its weapons firing with mathematical precision. Each shot was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum waste of ammunition. Corvin ships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were reduced to scrap metal with casual efficiency. But it wasn't just the weapons that made the human ship so terrifying. It was the intelligence behind them. Veltar watched as the Defiant Dawn anticipated every Corvin tactical maneuver, positioning itself perfectly to maximize damage while avoiding return fire. It was as if the human captain could read the enemy's minds. Remarkable, his tactical officer breathed. They're not just overpowering the Corvins, they're outthinking them at every turn. The Extinction's Edge finally managed to bring its main cannon to bear on the human ship. The weapon that had cracked moons fired its full force at point-blank range, unleashing energies that briefly outshone the local star. When the glare faded, the Defiant Dawn was still there, completely unharmed. If anything, it seemed slightly brighter than before. Thank you, Chen said cheerfully. Our shields were running a bit low. That energy boost was exactly what we needed. The human ship's main cannon swiveled toward the Corvin flagship, and Veltar held his breath. The Extinction's Edge was a kilometer of the most advanced military technology the Corvin Empire could produce. It carried enough firepower to sterilize a continent, and enough armor to survive a direct hit from a stellar flare. The Defiant Dawn fired once. The quantum cascade beam struck the Corvin flagship amidships, and proceeded to erase it from existence in sections. The bow and stern of the ship hung in space for almost 10 seconds before they too succumbed to the spreading field of annihilation. Where the pride of the Corvin fleet had been, there was now only empty space. The remaining Corvin ships lasted exactly 43 more seconds. When the battle was over, the Defiant Dawn hung alone in a debris field that had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy. The silence stretched until Veltar finally found his voice. Captain Chun, He transmitted, his words careful and respectful. On behalf of the Free Worlds Alliance, we are grateful for your intervention. May I ask what brings humans to this conflict? Chin's response took a moment to come, and when it did, her voice had lost its casual tone. Admiral, we've been watching the Corvan Empire's expansion for some time. We've seen what they do to conquered populations. Slavery, genetic experimentation, cultural extinction. That kind of behavior tends to upset us. And what does humanity intend to do about it? Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We're going to do what we do best, Admiral. We're going to end it. The Defiant Dawn began to turn away from the debris field, but before it moved toward hyperspace, Captain Chin's voice came over the comm one more time. Admiral Veltar, please pass a message to your superiors. Tell them that humanity is officially entering this conflict. The Corvan Empire has exactly 72 hours to begin complete withdrawal from all occupied territories and to release all enslaved populations. If they fail to comply, we will implement what we call the Total War Protocol. And what does that involve? Veltar asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Chin's laugh returned, but this time it carried no warmth at all. Admiral, humans have been perfecting the art of war for 10,000 years. We've fought each other across every possible battlefield, in every possible way. We've learned things about conflict that most species can't even imagine. Trust me when I say that the Corvans don't want to find out what happens when we stop holding back. 3 days later, Admiral Veltar stood in the council chambers of the Free Worlds Alliance, surrounded by representatives from 12 different species. The emergency session had been called after the Corvan Empire's response to Captain Chin's ultimatum arrived through diplomatic channels. The message had been brief, predictable, and sealed their fate. They refused? Asked Councillor Thrin, her plant-like features rustling with agitation. The Sylvani had lost 3 colony worlds to Corvan expansion in the past year alone. Worse than refused, Veltar replied, reading from the data pad in his lower left hand. They declared humanity an enemy of the Empire and vowed to hunt down every human world until their species is extinct. They've also accelerated their timetable for the conquest of the Outer Rim. The chamber filled with the various sounds of distress that 12 different species could produce. Some chittered, others hummed, and a few simply fell silent. They had all pinned their hopes on the mysterious humans after witnessing the destruction of the Corvan fleet. But the Empire was vast. One ship, no matter how powerful, couldn't stand against thousands. Perhaps we could convince the humans to share their technology, suggested Ambassador Corvex of the Nethek Confederation. If we could upgrade our fleets with their weapons systems. I don't think they're going to need our help, Veltar said quietly. Before anyone could ask what he meant, every communication system in the chamber activated simultaneously. Captain Chin's voice filled the room, though she hadn't been invited to the session and had given no indication she was even monitoring their discussions. Greetings, representatives of the Free Worlds Alliance. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I thought you should know that the 72-hour deadline expired 6 minutes ago. As promised, we are implementing Total War Protocol. The main display screen activated, showing what appeared to be an empty section of space near the Corvan border worlds. As they watched, reality began to tear open in dozens of places simultaneously. Hyperspace rifts appeared in perfect formation, each one disgorging a human warship. But these weren't all copies of the Defiant Dawn. The human fleet that emerged was a testament to their species' approach to warfare. Every possible configuration, every conceivable strategy represented in their ship designs. There were massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even Corvan flagships, sleek destroyers that seemed to flicker in and out of normal space, and carrier vessels that immediately began launching swarms of fighters. Representatives, meet the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet, Chen announced. 200 ships, all equipped with technology that makes the Defiant Dawn look like a pleasure yacht. Admiral Harrison will be commanding this operation. A new voice came over the comm, gravelly and professional. This is Admiral Harrison of the TDF Righteous Fury. All Corvan military assets in Sectors 7 through 23 are hereby designated as hostile targets. Any ship that does not immediately stand down and prepare for boarding will be destroyed. The representatives watched in stunned silence as the human fleet began to move. They advanced not in the standard formation patterns taught in every military academy, but in something that looked almost organic, like a predator pack that had worked together for countless hunts. The first Corvin response force never had a chance. They jumped into what they thought was a simple border skirmish and found themselves facing weapons that violated several laws of physics. The battle was over in minutes, leaving only debris and escape pods. "How?" whispered Counselor Thrin. "How do they have so many advanced ships? It took our civilizations millennia to develop space flight technology." Captain Chin's voice carried a note of what might have been pride. "Counselor, humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We've been preparing for this day since we first learned about the Corvin Empire's methods. But surely they can't have enough ships to challenge the entire empire?" Ambassador Corvex protested. "Admiral Veltar," Chin said, "please direct your sensors toward the following coordinates." The numbers that appeared on their screens made Veltar's translator unit stutter in confusion. Those coordinates were in deep space, far from any inhabited systems, in a region that all their charts marked as empty void. When the long-range sensors focused on the area, the chamber fell completely silent. Ships, thousands of them, tens of thousands. They hung in space in perfect formation, a fleet so vast that it stretched beyond the range of their most powerful sensors. The energy signatures were all human, all different, all radiating the kind of power that could reshape the galaxy. The 1st through 15th Human Expeditionary Fleets, Admiral Harrison explained matter-of-factly. Roughly 50,000 ships, with more being commissioned from our shipyards every day. We've been building them for the past 50 years, ever since our first contact with refugees from Corvin expansion. 50,000 ships? Veltar's voice came out as barely a whisper. 50,000 ships with weapons like yours? Actually, Chin said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. These ships are much more advanced than mine. The Defiant Dawn is nearly 20 years old. We've made considerable improvements since then. On the display, the massive human fleet began to move. It didn't advance in a single direction like a traditional invasion force. Instead, it split into dozens of task forces, each heading toward different Corvin strongholds simultaneously. Their strategy was immediately clear. They weren't planning to conquer the Empire piece by piece. They intended to hit every major Corvin installation at the same time. "This is impossible," stammered Representative Kellen of the Outer Colonies. "No species could build such a fleet without someone noticing." "Where did you come from?" "We've been here longer than you think," Admiral Harrison replied. "Humans have been exploring this galaxy for over a century. We've been watching, learning, preparing. We've seen what the Corvins do to conquered species, and we decided long ago that we would never allow it to happen to us or anyone else." "But the cost," Counselor Thrin began. "The cost of building this fleet." Chun interrupted. "Counselor, let me tell you about cost. The cost is every species the Corvins have enslaved. The cost is every world they've stripped bare. The cost is every culture they've erased. We've calculated that cost, and we've decided it's too high to accept." The first reports began coming in as human task forces engaged Corvin defenses across their empire. Each battle followed the same pattern: overwhelming human technological superiority, minimal casualties on the human side, and complete destruction of Corvin military assets. The empire that had dominated this region of space for 2 centuries was being systematically dismantled in a matter of hours. 6 months after the first human ship tore out of hyperspace above the ruins of Veltar's fleet, the galaxy was a very different place. Admiral Veltar stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching as ships from dozens of species moved freely through what had once been the heart of Corvin territory. The war had lasted exactly 18 days. 18 days for humanity to dismantle an empire that had dominated this region of space for 200 years. They had done it with such systematic efficiency that most Corvin worlds had surrendered without firing a shot once news of the first battles reached them. "Admiral," came a familiar voice behind him. Veltar turned to see Captain Shin approaching, looking remarkably relaxed for someone who had just participated in the complete reorganization of galactic civilization. She was smaller than he had expected when they finally met in person, Humans, it turned out, were about the same size as Zephyrians, though their internal structure was radically different. Captain Chun. Veltar greeted her with the formal bow his species used for honored allies. I wanted to thank you again for what your people have done. The liberation of the enslaved populations, the establishment of the protection protocols, the sharing of medical technology, it goes far beyond what anyone expected. Shin waved off his thanks with typical human casualness. Admiral, we didn't come here to build an empire of our own. We came to clean up a mess. Now that it's done, we're just making sure it doesn't happen again. Through the observation windows, they could see one of the most remarkable sights in the galaxy. A Corvan refugee ship being escorted to safety by human destroyers. After the fall of their empire, many Corvans had found themselves stranded on hostile worlds, facing revenge from the species they had oppressed. Humanity's response had been to offer protection and relocation services to any Corvan civilian who requested it. I still don't understand your people, Veltar admitted. You possess the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. You could have simply replaced the Corvan Empire with a human one. Instead, you're giving worlds back to their original inhabitants and helping former enemies find new homes. Chin smiled, an expression that Veltar had learned indicated human amusement or pleasure. Admiral, let me tell you something about humans. We've spent our entire history fighting wars, against nature, against each other, against anyone who threatened what we cared about. We got very, very good at it. But we also learned something important along the way, which is, the only war worth fighting is the one that ends all the fighting. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as a convoy of medical ships headed toward the former Corvan core worlds. Human doctors and engineers were working around the clock to undo centuries of environmental damage and provide care to populations that had been neglected under Imperial rule. What happens now? Veltar asked. Humanity has revealed itself to the galaxy, demonstrated capabilities that dwarf every other species combined. What are your people's intentions? Same thing we've always been doing, Chen replied. Exploring, learning, growing. We've got the whole galaxy to see, and from what I hear, there are other galaxies beyond this one. The universe is a big place, Admiral. There's room for everyone. And if another species decides to follow the Corvan path, if someone else tries to build an empire through conquest and oppression, Chin's smile disappeared, and, for a moment, Veltar caught a glimpse of the cold determination that had made humanity so terrifyingly effective against their enemies. Then, they'll learn the same lesson the Corvans did. We've spent 10,000 years learning how to fight, and we're very good students. A communication alert chimed, and Chen activated her personal comm device. Captain Chen here. Captain, this is Admiral Harrison. We've received a distress call from the Andromeda relay station. Appears to be some kind of mechanical species calling itself the Collective. They're demanding that all organic life in their path submit to conversion or face extinction. Chen's expression shifted to one of professional interest. How many ships are we looking at, Admiral? Current estimates put their fleet at around 2 million vessels. They've already consumed 3 star systems in the outer spiral arm. 2 million ships, Chen mused thoughtfully. That's almost enough to be interesting. How long until the 5th and 7th fleets can be repositioned? 12 hours for the 5th, 18 for the 7th. Excellent. Have them begin deployment procedures. And Admiral, tell the Collective that they have 72 hours to cease hostile operations and withdraw from occupied territories. And if they refuse? Harrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then, we introduce them to our new temporal disruption protocol. I think it's time to field test those chronological warfare systems. Chen closed the connection and turned back to Veltar, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror. 2 million ships, he said slowly. And you sound almost bored. Admiral, Chen said, and her smile returned. You have to understand something about humans. We've been preparing for threats like this our entire existence. Every war we've ever fought, every weapon we've ever built, every strategy we've ever developed, it was all leading to this. We're finally ready to take on the real challenges the universe has to offer. She paused at the entrance to the observation deck, looking back at him with eyes that held depths of experience he couldn't begin to fathom. Don't worry about the collective, Admiral. By the time we're done with them, they'll be just another cautionary tale about why you don't threaten organic life in this galaxy. And after that, Beltar asked, after you've defeated every threat, solved every problem, what does humanity do when there are no more wars to fight? Chin's laugh echoed through the chamber, warm and genuine and somehow completely terrifying. Oh, Admiral, you're thinking too small. This galaxy is just the beginning. There are billions of galaxies out there, each with their own challenges, their own mysteries, their own civilizations in need of help. We've got work to do. As she left, Veltar remained at the observation window, watching the peaceful traffic of the new galactic civilization. In the distance, he could see the sleek forms of human ships preparing for another impossible mission against another overwhelming enemy. For the first time since the war began, Admiral Veltar felt truly sorry for humanity's opponents. They had no idea what they were about to face. They thought they were dealing with just another species, another obstacle to be overcome. They were about to discover what it meant to fight a species that had turned warfare into an art form and had spent 10,000 years perfecting it. The galaxy, Veltar realized, had just become a much safer place for anyone who valued freedom, and a much more dangerous place for anyone who didn't.